Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the buffed Hizen. Yes, I'm still working my way through these buffs. We're getting to the end though of the very interesting ones to me. Hizen is interesting because it was a Dockyard ship a very long time ago. And I'm surprised that they are even making any changes to it at all. In fact, they made a pretty massive reload buff here to Hizen. If you haven't seen this thing before, it's a 12 410mm gun battleship at tier 9. So you're bringing down some of that Montana style gameplay with 12 guns to tier 9. Or we could compare it to Minnesota, which is the American tier 9 in the Vermont line, for example. This ship used to have a 38-second reload. It now has a 34-second reload. Combining that with reload mod, we get ourselves right around that 30 seconds. So unlike the American Vermont line, where you have that 40-second reload, because you're taking accuracy mod in your 6th upgrade slot, you got a 10-second better reload. Obviously, your dispersion is quite a lot worse, but these shells are very powerful. You get the 4th best salvo weight at your tier for battleships, so potential dev strikes will happen if you get lucky with your RNG. And these AP shells, well, not quite as good as Izumo as far as their alpha damage and their pen. They're still really good. We have solid pen. In fact, I'll show you an example of citadeling even a main at relatively long range. I was kind of surprised at how long a range I could actually get a citadel. So the pen really isn't a problem here. It is the dispersion, and specifically your vertical dispersion. You may have noticed already some of that inconsistency cropping up in on this Lepanto. As for the vertical dispersion of all the tier 9 battleships, you have the worst. It is the worst vertical dispersion. Horizontal's a little bit better. Japanese battleships, if you didn't know, have a slightly different dispersion table where they're a little better horizontally, but vertically is so bad. And that's not great, considering we want to be smashing broadsides with these 410mm guns. We get 12 of them. And that leads to a lot of inconsistent salvos. 1.7 sigma also means the tendency for the shells to go towards the center of your dispersion ellipse is not amazing either. We're looking for around 2.0 or above for more consistency there. So Hizen getting a 4-second reload buff, a little over 10% reload buff is nice. But much like Marco Polo, it doesn't impact the key problem that I personally have while playing this ship, and that is the inconsistency. Hizen doesn't have the sap gimmick though, so I personally would have liked to see a dispersion buff instead of a reload buff on this ship. That way you would have had more consistent damage, and you wouldn't have had that. I'll be honest, I find sap overpowered, so that overpowered sap shell to do a ton of damage regardless of the angle. 410mm guns, the key threshold you get over with overmatch is 27mm, which is fairly significant at tier 9. It gets less so as we go higher tier. Tier 10, I would not call this an amazing overmatch, certainly. Like Montana does not have great overmatch anymore. And so because of that, maybe that's why we don't have as good dispersion. It's still a very important factor to overmatch 27 at tier 9. And the ship can do quite well. Like I said, the averages looked relatively fine. Perhaps the play rate is low, but I would count that more towards this being a very old Dockyard ship that is really not available for anyone to get anymore than this ship being that bad to play. Or at least as far as the average damage goes. It's right in the middle of the pack of these tier 9s, but maybe it is just that this ship isn't that fun to play because of the inconsistency you get here with these 12 guns. It is a large salvo weight, so it's not like you can make it all that accurate and keep it balanced at tier 9, certainly. But for me, and perhaps others with ships like this that have poor sigma, poor consistency, there's a little bit less enjoyment there. It doesn't feel like what you do matters quite as much. And I think that Lepanto early in this game really showed that off. Oddly, it feels like I have much better dispersion against destroyers. Perhaps that's some sort of placebo or confirmation bias thing that I'm dealing with, but perhaps you've noticed that as well. Into that Hoffman, our parting salvo there with only 3 turrets, we got a lot of hits into him. And into this Lefantask, well, we're also going to get a lot of hits. 4 there, but that's enough to finish him off. There might have been even more shell hits had he had more HP. So against citadels, against cruisers, against battleships, it's tough to hit that Lepanto. Yet the small destroyer I'm able to hit. I'm not playing my best here, certainly. And this is another element that leads me to maybe say this a little bit more often than is necessary, I suppose. But I played poorly here. I deserve to probably not get a lot of damage. I think I was playing well in positioning my ship to deal with that Lepanto as he pushed in. I did not get rewarded with all that great of damage. Here, I push in, I eat a face full of torpedoes, I'm broadside onto this tangent, and we get a dev strike. Does what you do really matters? Does how you play really matters? Maybe the more I turn my brain off, the worse I play, the more the game rewards me. That's not exactly true, but every once in a while it feels like that, doesn't it? Where I played so badly here, not paying attention to torpedoes. That was such a massive misplay on my part, and yet I get rewarded for it. I'm low HP, and we get rewarded again with another Citadel into a Hipper. What a funny game this is, right? It is just an arcade game after all. There's maybe less skill in it than I would like. And so with Hizen, you do have to get lucky with your dispersion. And I suppose given it a 10% or a little more than 10% reload buff means you have a few more rolls of the dice when it comes to the dispersion on your salvos here. And it turns out we get ourselves a pretty good game. 150k damage into this one, a few kills, a dev strike. Looks awesome, right? Unfortunately, I wasn't too pleased after this game. I felt like I was not rewarded for playing well when I was finding a broadside Lepanto. And then I felt like I wasn't punished properly for playing poorly. And in fact, I got rewarded for playing poorly. A little backwards, a little counterintuitive to what I would prefer. But still, it shows off the ship. I think it's a great example of what this ship is all about. Bit of an RNG fiesta with high broadside salvo weight on this AP. I should mention that your HE is not too bad either. As far as alpha damage goes, you have 6,500 alpha, so pretty solid with a 30% fire chance, meaning you're not going to get a lot of fires, but pretty high alpha damage should net you a lot of damage into those double up tiers. Perhaps that's a good thing to use. Personally, you know me, I'm more interested in those broadside salvos, in those AP salvos. Nice hit into the Pommern there, for example. I don't want to miss out on those opportunities, so you'll see me almost exclusively shoot AP out of battleships. I know I probably shouldn't. I know I probably should swap to the HE a lot more often than I do. It's just something about the way I play the game, I guess, and that I just much prefer using armor piercing than other ammo types with these battleships. When you're in these down tiers into tier 9 games where there's tier 7s, well, it's pretty good to bring 12 410mm guns with essentially a 30-second reload with reload mod into these games. It is very, very difficult for these tier 7s to deal with you. +2, -2 matchmaker, man. It is very, very hard anytime you're at the extreme end of that up tier. This poor Nagato here, really, really difficult to play these kinds of games. He's broadside on. We only get one hit, but it is a Citadel. Our pen is very, very good on this armor piercing. And it means a lot of what Hizen is able to accomplish in these games is left to, can you hit the weak points on enemy ships? Is your dispersion going to cooperate or not? The shell velocity is pretty solid here too, so it's a relatively easy lead even at these longer ranges here. Into this Iowa, relatively quick, and even over an island, able to get a decent hit into him. As for our turret angles, they're also very good. 30 degrees forward, 30 degrees backwards. A very underrated element of ships is their ability to stay angled while also firing all of their guns. Hizen does not have any particularly good armor, though. It's 32mm everywhere. I'll show you that after the battle when we look at the build, of course. But you're not a brawler. Pommern should be a better brawler, but Pommern has a gigantic superstructure. We actually have a pretty small superstructure here, and that means we're actually surprisingly tanky when angled if people aren't overmatching into our 32mm plating. Poor Pommern, man. Poor Pommern. That ship has such a gigantic superstructure that, while angled like this, it doesn't mean he's actually that strong. You aim up into the superstructure, and he dies. Poor guy, man. Poor guy. Secondaries are not something you should run. Perhaps you were thinking it's like an Iwami or something like that with these secondaries. No, it does not have the improved accuracy at all, and your pen and damage really isn't worth talking about either. This is not a ship that wants to play at closer ranges. It is a ship that wants to play at medium range, even longer range, although given dispersion, probably more medium range. That 12 to 15 kilometer range, if you can make that work, is going to be really, really good. It does only come with 3 heals base, by the way. So not only do you have a little bit weak armor for your tier as a battleship, you also don't have as much healing as other tier 9 battleships would have. Also lending itself to that mid-range playstyle, a little more sniping, a little bit less going in and getting focused, or, you know, pulling focus for your team, tanking, that sort of thing. Probably not the best idea to do here. Overmatch helping us into that poor Austin there. Light cruisers, unfortunately. This ship will do pretty well when they are angled, of course. When they're broadside, our shell velocity and pen means a lot of overpens. And into this Yamato, though. He's showing his cheek citadel there, hoping to land a salvo in there. And look at the pocket that just opens up there in our salvo. Perfectly surrounding his citadel that I wanted to hit. Yeah, inconsistent, right? Inconsistent. And I understand you can't make these things perfectly accurate and perfectly consistent. But something like Hizen, the reason you don't see me play it all that often, and other ships like it, is just purely down to the RNG factor is not that enjoyable for me. I much prefer ships that I can rely on more. Speaking of inconsistent, what if we just, you know, roll the other way and get a perfect dispersion salvo into a ship that has already gone dark, that is angled to us? That Austin probably didn't deserve to take either of those citadels, yet he did. So making sure, RNG here, making sure that everyone is a little bit frustrated while playing the game. I suppose that's fair, right? If nobody's happy, then everything's okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Austin player. That is rough. That is very difficult to deal with. Austin even has 32 mil plating on its upper belt, so protecting its citadel at these angles, so I'm surprised I even got some of that damage in. You see how passive I've been playing in this game, and I do think that is how you need to play Hizen in these double up tiers. You got to be very careful. There were a lot of DDs here, maybe even subs around, so I was playing very passive. A little bit boring, but safe. And then we finally get ourselves that main salvo, 15 kilometers away. Tier 9 battleship is able to citadel. That's 35k near enough into that main at 15 kilometers. That surprised me. I was expecting shatters there, actually. So very nice to see that extra pen helping us out, that shell velocity as well, once that aiming system cooperates. Angled Petro, though, yeah, probably here would be a good idea to swap over to the high explosive. Maybe hopefully get a few more full pens rather than bounces and shatters in this case. It is difficult to deal with these angled targets at closer ranges, so swapping to the Ichi is probably a good idea. This ship has enough range that probably you don't need to run range mod, right? There's a placebo, there's a small element of accuracy you can gain with range mod, but with spotter plane, I don't think we need that. The reload is quite nice. This is a much more substantial buff than Marco Polo, where 1.5 seconds didn't really move the needle for me. 4 seconds is significant, man. That is a significant buff for this ship. I still probably won't play it because of the inconsistency, but if you haven't taken a look at Hizen in a while, maybe it's worth checking out at tier 9, given that it's now 12 410mm guns with a 30-second reload. That's pretty strong. I'm still very interested as to why Wargaming is buffing this ship of all ships. Like I said, I mean, the average win rate is actually quite high, but I think that's more a factor of not many people have it. Generally, more experienced players probably have a higher win rate, right? And the average damage was pretty much middle of the pack here with Hizen. So weird to see it getting buffed, but sure, I will take it. Not that I'll play it all that often, but it is a nice buff. Maybe not the buff I would like to see on an inconsistent ship, but under 30-second reload is pretty nice. As for the commander build, this is what I was running. Trying to deal with that problem of only 3 heals. We take 4, and then if we ever get to 2 million potential damage, we get a 5th one. A little bit less likely to do that with this ship, I gotta say, but maybe. I did try a super heavy AP build. It turned out to be a little too greedy, and I died quickly. The armor just wasn't good enough. It's not very fast. Maneuverability is pretty bad as well. you get hit relatively consistently, and your armor doesn't really hold up. So greeting out a furious heavy AP build did not work out in my favor. Grease the Gear is pretty nice for slow turret traverse here on these Japanese battleships as well. Upgrades wise, looks pretty standard here. You could go damage control system for a little better tankiness against those fires, but prop mod helped me to hopefully avoid some more torpedoes, a little bit of speed juking. Your superstructure isn't the largest. It's, you know, pretty short actually as far as the length of the ship goes. So pretty nice that way. Maybe some speed juking allows more shots to miss that vulnerable superstructure. But you see this 32 millimeters of armor everywhere. You get overmatched. You get full penned by a lot of HE at this tier as well. At least the turret angles are pretty solid, 30 degrees forwards and back, allowing you to relatively easily stay angled as you have a vulnerable citadel here. Not very well armored. It's sloped, but nowhere near enough to be effective turtleback. So pretty unfortunate citadel here, meaning you do need to stay angled. You got to be very careful when you're in closer ranges. So playing mid-range, playing a little safer, probably the way to go with a ship like this. Yeah, pretty low armor for a tier 9 battleship, I gotta say. You gotta be quite careful. But you do have 12 410 millimeter guns, which is rather powerful in and of itself, even if the accuracy is a little bit unfortunate. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.